Al pi Hashem yis'u v'al pi Hashem yachanu. Klal Yisrael, the Jewish people in the desert, travel and camp and travel and camp, and they go through a whole series of different places that they arrive at. Sometimes they stay for a day, sometimes for a week, sometimes for a month, sometimes for years. They're never sure exactly how long they're going to stay there. But one thing they know for sure, that they are baderech le'eretz Yisrael. They're on their way to the land of Israel, and that this traveling is not by chance. Al pi Hashem yachanu, al pi Hashem yisrael means that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has a special goal in mind and a special meaning in mind for every different station along the way. This concept of Parshas Bamidbar is extremely important on different levels. On a national level, we all know that Klal Yisrael throughout history went through multiple Vayisu Vayachanus, all sorts of different countries where the Jewish community lived and prospered for centuries, and then suddenly were expelled and had to leave. And the Vayisu Vayachanu is actually the model of the whole of Jewish history. And the Torah is telling us that each stage along the way was Hashgacha v'HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Each stage along the way wasn't simply a random product of political and economic forces, but was actually part of the entire divine plan for educating Klal Yisrael and bringing us closer, firstly, to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and secondly, Baderech L'Eretz Yisrael. Wherever we are living, we are one stage further, Baderech, on our own journey towards Eretz Yisrael and towards a better future for the Klal Yisrael. On a personal level, also, the Baal Shem Tov says in the name of the Zohar in a number of places that every individual man and woman goes through in their life 42 masa'ot, 42 different stages. Sometimes they last for a minute, sometimes for a week, sometimes for a month or for years. These are stages along the way of a person's own spiritual development, bringing us closer to our HaKadosh Baruch Hu. If we understand Al pi Hashem yachanu, Al pi Hashem yisau, if we understand that every stage along the way is either a gift from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, if it's a particularly beneficial and inspirational moment, and it's a place which is full of light and simcha, or it's a nisayon, or if it's a place of difficulty and suffering, then that is a test from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But each one of them is equally min hashamayim. And here comes an interesting symbol which we find in Parshas Ba'aloscha in chapter 10. The HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to Moshe Rabbeinu, "Asei lecho shtei chatzotzeros kesef mikshot ta'aseh osam," to make silver trumpets. Now, don't make a mistake about this. We find in the Torah multiple klei zemer, lots of musical instruments used by the Leviim to accompany the avodah in the Beis Hamikdash. This was not part of that system. Hallelu Hashem b'chino, b'sofa mochel, yezamru loi. We know lots of different instruments that we used singing the praises of HaKadosh Baruch Hu during the time in the Beis Hamikdash, and even today during Simchas. But these chatzotzos were something different. First of all, they weren't blown by the Leviim, they were only blown by the Kohanim. Secondly, they had a very, very clear, a coded form of sounds, which was the tekiah and the teruah. And here's a lot of very interesting, very fascinating depths of meaning here. You know, the Torah is the Torah is broad and deep to such a degree that whenever we're learning a seemingly simple parsha, it would appear that these chatzotzos are simply means of communication. How Moshe Rabbeinu informs the Jewish people, right, today it's time to travel. Right, today it's time to strike camp. That's a Poshet Pshat. Nevertheless, these chatzotzos contain within them. So if we look in Rashi, for example, on Pasuk 10, Rashi says, Mikan londu malchios zichronos v'shefros. No more, no less than the entire central core of our tefillos of Rosh Hashanah with the shofar is learnt out from these chatzotzos. How is that? What is the message here in these chatzotzos, which is so crucial to our Rosh Hashanah and so crucial to personal development? How is this supposed to work? And so here's an interesting thing. First of all, I'm particularly interested in the word miksha. Mikshah means these silver trumpets were beaten out of a single piece of silver. They weren't molded, and they weren't melted, and they weren't soldered together from different pieces. They had to be made out of one piece of silver and then beaten out of it. Why is that so important? Incidentally, we find this in two other places in the Torah, both with the keruvim on top of the kapores and with the menorah itself. I won't go into that now for lack of time. But here we find that these chatzotzros were mikshah. What does that mean? So in order to get a bit deeper into this subject, we need to look first at the Ramban. The Ramban tells us that there are two sounds that the Torah introduces us to here in Baalei Zchor. One is the tekiah, which is the loud, clear, uninterrupted sound, and that represents the midas harachamim of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the gifts from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, uv'yom simchaschem, u'moadeichem, u'rosh chodshechem, u'seka'atem b'chatzotzros. The tekiah, the long, unbroken sound of the tekiah, represents the yichud Hashem, the oneness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and our appreciation of our living our lives in the presence of the Rebbeinu Shalom, b'simcha or b'sosoin, tachas kanfei hashchina. That's the tekiah. And then comes the teruah. The teruah is the sound which is a trembling sound. Right? There are two types of trembling sounds. There's what we call the teruah, what we call the shvarim, but they both have one thing in common. They are broken sounds. And the broken sound represents that life feels broken. Life feels difficult and hardships and suffering, and as a result of which we're trembling. And we're blowing the teruah as an expression of our trembling. And what's interesting is that both the tekiah and the teruah, both the rejoicing and the trembling, represents equal parts of our Torah life and the way we stand before HaKadosh Baruch Hu. As the Mishnah says in Brachas chapter 9, Chayav Odom Lavorech al Hara'ah Kashem Shu Mavorech al Torah, to find within us that level of emunah, that both the gifts and the tests of life both come from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And I think possibly that's what it means, mikshah. Mikshah means it's all one piece. It's all one piece. It's called emunah. The emunah, our deeper emunah, guides us to understand that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, along our Membeis Masa'os, along our 42 stations of our personal travels and our national travels, there are times of gifts, of simcha, and times of nisoyon, times of hardships, but they are both equally lifnei Hashem, al pi Hashem yisu, v'al pi Hashem yachanu. And that is, I think, really a most wonderful message that we get out of what at first sight is simply a means of communication, telling Klal Yisrael when it's time to travel. Interestingly, the Rambam in Hilchos Ta'anit, chapter 1, says something very fascinating. It's true that all the ta'aniyos that we have, apart from Yom Kippur, come from rabbinic origin, whether it's Tisha B'Av or Shavuos B'Tammuz, whatever it is. These ta'anesim are all rabbinic halachas. Nevertheless, when a person fasts properly, and he knows what he's doing on these ta'anesim, there's a kiyum ha-mitzvah of one of the mitzvahs asay. And what is that mitzvahs asay? The Rambam finds in this little episode of making trumpets, he finds a mitzvahs asay, one of the Tareg mitzvahs. And the mitzvah isn't to make trumpets, because the making of trumpets was only a localized mitzvah in the Midbar. Later on, there weren't these trumpets anymore. So what is the mitzvah here? The mitzvah is lehispalel ba'eis tzara. In times of difficulty and hardship, to turn to HaKadosh Baruch Hu in tefillah, that is a mitzvah's asay, which incidentally for the Rambam is separate from the general mitzvah's asay to daven every day. L'ovdei b'chol avavchem. There's a general mitzvah to daven every day and stand before HaKadosh Baruch Hu like an eved. But in times of hardship, there's a special mitzvah learned out from the Chatzotzros. There's a special mitzvah, and he says, Zubi darkei hatshuva. And the point of it is to bring us closer to self-improvement, to spiritual growth, to the tshuva process, which is all part and parcel of every tanis, and which is the meaning behind every tekiah, teruah, tekiah, and that's the connection between Rosh Hashanah, that's the connection between these sounds of the shofar, and this is really a very profound parsha, a parsha which is inspirational on a national level, on a personal level, but you have to dig deep into the psukim and into Chazal in order to understand that these chatzotzros, that they are mikshah. Mikshah means that both the Midas Hadin and the Midas Harachamim are not two separate experiences. They're all part and parcel of our standing before our Kadosh Baruch Hu, and Yehi Ratzon that we should be able to blow our chatzotzeros metaphorically, b'simchaschem of moadeichem, times of joy and times of hisromamus, and in that way connect to our Kadosh Baruch Hu in the best way possible. V'chein Yehi Ratzon.